Well, welcome everybody to week 2 of our 4-week WebEx series with Dr. Deanna Minich, brought to you by Harmony Hill Retreat Center. This evening's session is going to be the Skinny on Fats. My name is Elaine Holland, and I'm Harmony Hill's Executive Director. We're a nonprofit retreat center founded over 25 years ago by Gretchen Schade, and we're located on the Olympic Peninsula, just 2 hours west of Seattle. Harmony Hill's mission is to transform the lives of those affected by cancer and to inspire healthy living for all. At the heart of our mission is our 3-day cancer retreat, which we offer once a month at no charge for those with cancer and their caregivers. Please mark your calendars for our 3rd annual Survivorship Fair on Saturday, August 25th. This free event, which includes lunch, is for anyone with cancer, their caregivers, as well as those interested in cancer prevention and wellness. Deanna will be talking about we'll have 2 nutrition talks at the Survivorship Fair this year. In the morning, she'll be talking about everything you were afraid to ask about nutrition and didn't know to ask. Well, Deanna, what's the name of that?
Everything, yeah, I believe it's everything you always wanted to know about nutrition, but were afraid to ask. So it'll be an interactive Q&A.
Great. And then the afternoon is top foods to eat and to avoid. Is that correct?
That's right.
Great. I'm glad I got one of the 2 right. So at Harmony Hill, we believe that good nutrition is pivotal for cancer prevention, both during, before, and after treatment. And over the next 2 weeks, as well as this evening, Harmony Hill is sponsoring these inspirational and informative sessions on nutrition. If you miss a session or would like to review this evening's presentation, the sessions are recorded and posted on our website, harmonyhill.org. And last week's session is already posted, as well as the handout. So if you did attend last week and you want the handout, please go to our website. Now I'd like to introduce you to Dr. Deanna Minich. Deanna has over 20 years of experience in the field of nutrition, wellness, and healing, and her unique approach combines, I love this, science and spirituality. You know, they seem like an oxymoron. They don't go together, but you find a way to pull together science and spirituality, practicality and poetry, body and soul within the realm of eating as a means of experiencing greater personal growth through one's relationship with food. Deanna earned her PhD in nutrition from the University of Groningen in the Netherlands and has a master's degree from the University of Illinois. She's also the author of several books. So with that, I'm going to turn you over to Deanna, who will give us this evening the Skinny on Fats.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Elaine, for that beautiful introduction. And again, I'd like to thank Harmony Hill Retreat Center for even sponsoring these webinars and providing high-quality nutrition information to people all over. It seems like we've had a number of different webinar participants that are beyond even the local area. So thanks so much to all of you for participating in this, and I hope that this information is useful and helpful. And as Elaine mentioned, what I'm also doing is providing handouts to you after the webinar so that you have this news to use in a tangible, practical format. So you will also receive a handout after this webinar as well. So the topic for tonight is the Skinny on Dietary Fats, what you need to know. I cannot tell you how many people ask me questions about what types of fats to eat. You know, if you think of the 1990s, we went through this whole series of commercial trends where we had all these fat-free foods, and butter was bad, and margarine was in, and now margarine is out, and butter's back in, and so there's lots of confusion here. And so I asked Harmony Hill to do this webinar specifically to hope to clear up a lot of the confusion around dietary fats and really just make the information very easy and streamlined. So what are we going to discuss tonight? And the reason why I have this woman here holding this this word is because many times people think of fat as a a four-letter, three-letter word that people just don't even want to talk about it. They're confused about it. And so we are going to venture into this terrain. We're going to talk about how essential fat is. In fact, my whole PhD, my dissertation was on essential fatty acids. And so I feel really passionate about this topic and why we need fats. It's not a bad word. And what I'd like to convey as well, as you see as we go through this, that not all fats are created equal. Indeed, there are some fats along the spectrum that are considered to be more healthful, and then there are some other fats that are considered to be less healthful. So we'll talk about how to stay away from the quote-unquote bad fats and how to eat more of those quote-unquote good fats. Now, three critical takeaways that I'd like you to have at the end, and I'm putting them before we even start so that they're first and foremost because they are really important. And that is, number one, too much fat can lead to disease. We know specifically that too much fat can lead to cardiovascular disease, as well as a number of other issues, including obesity, overweight, and a number of different inflammatory conditions. Number two, too little fat can lead to disease. And we are going to talk about what that means, what types of diseases, what types of symptoms might you have if you're getting too little fat in your diet. And then finally, the type of fat and the balance of various fats in your diet are the critical features that determine how fat contributes to your health. So really what we're talking about is the quality and the quantity and how all of those different fats come into balance in your everyday eating. So here we have a graphic on how fats have changed our health and how our physiology is really changing as a result of all of our changes in our food supply. So one of the first things to recognize is that over time there's been increased consumption of omega-3 deficient warm weather oils. So what does that mean? That means that we've been getting much more in the way of corn, sunflower, and sesame oils, and some of these liquid oils that are what we would call higher in omega-6 fats. And I'm going to explain what that means. But you probably have heard that, you know, corn oil is in a number of different products and typically a number of processed products. Now, the other aspect that makes fats potentially unhealthy is what food manufacturers have been doing, which is taking liquid oils and adding hydrogen groups to them in order to make a liquid into more of a solid fat. These types of fats are what we call partially hydrogenated oils, and we are definitely going to talk about those today because they tie into trans fats and the health implications of these trans fats. We've also been reducing the amount of fish that we've been consuming. So I'm hoping that probably with the increased awareness around omega-3 fatty acids that people are going to consume more fish, although the downside of consuming more fish is that you also get potentially more methylmercury. And having the mercury in the fish can attenuate a lot of the effects of those healthy omega-3 fats. So we're going to talk about that a bit. Also, through manufacturing of food and creating a standard supply of grains, what has happened is that many of those grains need to be defatted in order to be stable. So they make products like shelf-stable, ready-to-eat cereals, meals, different pastas and such. Any kind of carbohydrate or starchy product has had to remove that the fat that's contained in the germ of the grain so that it can be more shelf-stable. And as a result of taking out the germ, we are also taking out the fat. So that is unfortunate because we're missing a lot of those healthy oils. We've also, because of the whole push with fat-free foods, we've had an increase in sugar intake because if you take something out, you have to replace it. And typically, you replace the fat with sugar. So over the past 2 decades, since the 1990s, we've had a phenomenal increase in sugar intake. And as part and parcel of that, also with all the changes in food manufacturing, we're also seeing an increase in these trans fatty acids. And I'm going to talk more about what those are. You may have already heard about them. Since 2006, we now see that on the label of food products. I'm going to explain tonight why it's so important to pay attention to trans fatty acids. And the last piece, I think, is essential for everybody to be aware of, and that is that the fats are a depot for many of the toxins in our environment. This is important from a cancer perspective. It's also important from a weight loss perspective. As we start to lose weight, what happens is we start to liberate a lot of those toxins into our bloodstream. So in fact, a study just was published earlier this year in a medical journal talking about the elevated toxins in the systemic circulation with weight loss. So we need to be aware of that as well. And if we're choosing animal fats, we need to be aware of the potential for the storage of different environmental toxins within that animal fat. So how do we move away from fat phobia? I think it's important to be educated about fats rather than to have a lot of fear around fats. So I have this picture here of a bicycle caught in a rut. This is kind of what I call synaptic rutting, where we think the same thing over and over again, and it kind of paralyzes us. So what I'm hoping is that we move away from having that kind of fat fear. So, and what has generated that is really all the marketing of these no-fat or low-fat food products. And so we tend to think that avoiding fat or restricting fat is a good thing. And you may have heard a lot about low-fat diets, low-fat ways of eating, low-fat cookbooks. And many people have the assumption that if they eat fat, they're going to become fat versus eating protein, carbohydrate, or other nutrients. And the general rule of thumb there is anything that you're having to excess beyond your needs for maintenance for your normal metabolic processes will definitely lead to an increase in weight. Now, you may have been familiar with some of Michael Pollan's work. Michael Pollan's a wonderful food journalist. He's written a number of different books, and this one is called In Defense of Food. And when he's talking about fat, what he says here in one of his chapters is that, could it be that the problem with the Western diet is a growth deficiency in this essential nutrient? So he's talking about fat. And furthermore, he says a growing number of researchers have concluded that it is, and they voice frustration that official nutritional advice has been slow to recognize the problem. To do so, of course, would mean conceding error of past nutritional advice, demonizing fats in general, and promoting the switch to seed oils high in omega-6. So Mr. Pollan clearly recognizes that the transition away from healthy fats and reducing fats has potentially caused a deficiency or insufficiency in a number of these fats that are essential to good health. Now, there's a documentary that I would really, if you're interested in this whole aspect of our food supply, what's in our food, at Harmony Hill last summer, we showed Super Size Me. Another great documentary is called King Corn. King Corn focuses on how much of our food supply is inundated with corn. Corn in the way of maltodextrin, the starchy part of corn. Also corn oil. And corn oil is in a number of different products. And what you see here, I'll explain this. So 25% monounsaturated fat, 62% polyunsaturated fat, and 13% saturated fat. So corn oil has a mixture of different fatty acids that may have good effects in our body and not so good effects. So there's been a lot of confusion. You know, what do? Do you follow a low-fat way of eating? Do you do low-carb, high-protein? There's lots of confusion about that. And again, I like to move away from talk around low and high, because when we start talking about low, it means we're high in something else. So if we're high and we're low in something, chances are we're not in balance. And that's the key word. What is balance? What is moderation? What are optimal ratios of good, healthy fats so that we can maintain a healthful life? So let's start off talking about fats and their physiological function in the body. In fact, we know that fats are some of the most essential nutrients in the human diet. If you study protein, you'll know that there are certain types of proteins that are not made in the body, and they're called essential. The same thing with fats. There are certain fats that are not made in the human body, but they're very essential for us. So fats are used throughout the body. I'm going to give you a number of reasons why they're necessary. The first one is that fats provide us with a source of energy. So we get 9 calories per gram of fat. So it's the most energy-dense macronutrient, which is why people might have that conception that if I eat fat, I'm going to get fat. Now keep in mind, I'm going to do a little questionnaire at the end of this webinar. I didn't do it for the first one, but I have a series of questions and kind of a little test at the end. So see if you can remember a number of these different reasons as to why fats are necessary. So number 1, energy production. Number 2, in every cell of your body, you have a cell wall or a cell membrane, and that membrane is made of fat. So essentially, every cell in your body needs fat for part of their structure. We also need fat for storage and insulation. If we have fat around our organs, at least minimal amounts of fat, we keep them cushioned and protected. And fat can also help us with temperature regulation. Central nervous system function. Our nerves are coated with a myelin sheath made of fats. Now, there are certain conditions such as multiple sclerosis and other types of neurodegenerative conditions where we start to see a decrease in those healthy fats around the nerves. And so we start to see dysfunction in nerves. Vision. Your eyes, the back of your eye, your retina, is filled with these healthy fats. And it's really important to include fluid fats in the back of the eye. Cell signaling, what does that mean exactly? That means that the way that your cell is communicating within, on the inside, to the DNA, as well as from cell to cell, is largely determined by the fat composition in the membrane. Another aspect that many people are very tuned into is that they play a role in healthy skin and nails. I can always tell the types of fats that people are getting or whether or not they're deficient by looking at their hair, their skin, and their nails. We can really see some changes, especially as I start talking about essential fatty acids. You'll see how dermatitis or inflammation of the skin is one of the symptoms of essential fatty acid deficiency. What about cardiovascular disease and inflammation? Indeed, these healthy fats play a role in blood pressure, blood clotting, and inflammation. Gene expression related to metabolism. So that's a fancy way of saying that basically your metabolic processes, how you burn calories for energy, is connected to the DNA and is connected indirectly to fat. Behavior. Now, how can behavior be connected to fat? Well, as I'm going to show you, 60% of our brain is fat. We do have fat heads. And within that matter, depending on the composition of the fat we have, can determine whether or not we'll be more predisposed to things like aggression, irritability, anger, attention deficit disorder, depression, and anxiety. There are a whole host of different behavioral issues that are connected to fats. I'll go through that a little bit more. Also, we need fat to absorb the fat-soluble vitamins A, D, E, and K, as well as other nutrients like carotenoids, like beta-carotene. So you might think of carrots, right? So when you think of carrots, you might think of beta-carotene. Well, you don't absorb much of that beta-carotene unless you have a little bit of fat together with that carrot. Similarly, I know that you've all heard a lot about vitamin D. We don't absorb vitamin D without the presence of some type of fat. which is why many times multivitamins and other forms of vitamins, especially the fat-soluble ones, need to be taken with a meal that includes some fat. So 1 tablespoon of fat contains about 120 calories. So indeed, it is very nutrient dense. Don't forget, it has 9 calories per gram. So there are 2 big buckets of fats. You know, there's 2 classifications. One classification is that you have liquid oils, and typically those liquids are unsaturated fats, and I'll explain a little bit more what that means. So anywhere from, you can have olive oil, canola oil, peanut oil, a lot of the different seed and nut oils, all of these are liquid oils. You can also have saturated fats. Saturated fats typically tend to be solid at room temperature. So these fats are often animal in origin, but they can also be vegetable in origin, as you can see here. So the palm tree, also coconut, which is more in the vegetable family. It's not in the animal family. So you get kind of a combination of different fats here under saturated fats. Now here's a good takeaway. I'd like you to remember this. When we talk about fats, they are very complex. It's not that corn oil is just all one type of fat. There are actually a variety of different types of fats within corn oil. And so what this graph shows you is that within the different types of dietary fats, there are different compositions of saturated and unsaturated fat. So let's take an example here. So let's look at soybean oil. What it tells us here is that soybean oil has 15% of its fat as saturated fat. And you may not have thought about soybean oil having any saturated fat, but it does have a small percentage of saturated fat. It also has a large percentage of a specific fat called linoleic acid. It also has 7% alpha-linolenic acid, another type of fat, and about 24% monounsaturated fat, and that's the type of fat we typically find in olive oil. So the takeaway here is that fats and oils, whether they're liquid or solid, is really kind of a whole combination of different fats. Okay, so what does it mean when we say saturated or unsaturated? Saturated fats are solid. Remember the S unsaturated connecting to the S in solid. So what we have here from a chemical point of view is lots of carbons, lots of hydrogens, and it's really, it doesn't move much. It's like a straight line. The unsaturated ones at the bottom, you're going to see a different structure here. You're going to see 2 lines between the carbons instead of 1 line, which means that there's much more flexibility and fluidity here. Okay, so when we look at them in a different way, what we can see is that if you look at the top, all those gray bubbles, and seeing that straight line down, that's like a saturated fat. But the fat right next to that with that little kink in it, right, with that double bond, that makes a little bit of a kink in the structure of the fat. And you can imagine down at the bottom that if you have a cell with straight lines that are tightly packed, it might be a little bit different to get things inside and outside of the cell versus if you had a cell membrane with lots of these different spaces and lots of fluidity. So keep that in mind because the actual physical properties of the fats will determine their function in the body. So as you can see here, I drew it really simply. Saturated fat's like a line. Monounsaturated fat has a little bit of a kink in it, so it has a little bit of a fluid structure to it. So that's like olive oil. Corn oil is even more fluid and flexible than olive oil. As you can see there, it's got kind of 2 bumps in it. The omega-3 fats that I'm going to be talking about tonight, like fish oil or flaxseed oil, are the most fluid. So keep that in mind. If we want fluidity and flow in the body, omega-3 fats are the best choice for us. So here you can see, this is an enlargement from one of my books where I show you how if this is a cell membrane, kind of the wall of the cell, what determines what gets in and what gets out, you can see up at the top that a healthy cell will have a combination of saturated and unsaturated fluid fats. If we have too many rigid saturated fats, we're not going to have as much flow in and out of the cell. And if we have a lot of unsaturated fats, as we see at the bottom, we're going to have a lot of flow, maybe excessive flow. So why do we care about this? Well, we care about this because the way that our cells receive nutrients and process toxins will determine the health of the cell. So if things are not getting out of the cell because we have too many saturated fats, you can imagine that the cell will not be as healthy. Okay, so fats, fatty acids, thinking about them as saturated and unsaturated, solid and liquid. Now, under unsaturated, I want to show you something here. It gets a little bit more complex. You have polyunsaturated fats, which means very fluid, and then you have monounsaturated fats, which means somewhat fluid. And if you look at the types of polyunsaturated fats, and I've already alluded to this, the omega-3s and the omega-6 fats are really fluid fats, meaning that they're really squiggly. They allow our cells to be nice and flowing. The monounsaturated fat, like you have in olive oil, has a little bit of that fluidity. You also find a lot of monounsaturated fat in avocados and also in nuts. Now, here's the key. If we take these omega-6 and omega-3 fats and look at them a little bit more, I want to show you that the omega-6, when we have too many, they can offset the balance of inflammation in the body. So we might get a little bit more inflammation. Whereas with omega-3 fats, what we see is that they have an anti-inflammatory effect. They have a cooling effect on the body. So if you think about it, we've been talking about all the corn oil in our food supply. Corn oil is an omega-6 fat. So it's been predicted and shown that on average an American diet has too much omega-6 and not enough omega-3 fats. So the important piece here is that we need them both, but we need them in balance. We need more omega-3 and less of the omega-6. Okay, I mentioned to you the word essential when it comes to fats. There are certain fats that our body needs to take in from the diet. We cannot make them. And those are called, rightly so, essential fatty acids. The omega-6 and the omega-3 fats are both essential. But what I mentioned previously in the other slide is that we tend to get too much of those omega-6s. So now we have thrown off the balance between our essential fatty acids in our body. So the omega-3s I mentioned from flaxseed, also from fish oil. And these fancy acronyms here speak to the particular type of fatty acid. So ALA refers to alpha-linolenic acid, and that's in flaxseed. Then you have EPA, eicosapentaenoic acid, and DHA, or docosahexaenoic acid. In fact, if you take a fish oil supplement, you probably see these two acronyms on the label. These are the two fats that are commonly found in fish. Now, there are a number of fats that our body can make, so we don't really need to eat them. These fats are the saturated fats, the monounsaturated fats like olive oil, and certain other polyunsaturated fats. And the trans fatty acids that we're going to talk about, which are completely non-essential, and we want to be sure that we don't get many of those at all in our diet. So let's talk about first the non-essential fats. Saturated fat, monounsaturated fat. Now, I know that you've probably heard a lot about saturated fat, okay? And in fact, you probably have heard that saturated fat is bad and try to reduce it. I agree that it's very important that we reduce the amount of saturated fat. However, let's remember not to, quote unquote, throw the baby out with the bathwater. That expression of saying that all saturated fats are the same, because they're really not. In fact, we're learning a lot more about the different types of saturated fat and how they might actually be beneficial. So here are some common examples of fatty acids that are saturated. So you have one type of saturated fat that you find in butter. You have some that you find in coconut oil, palm kernel oil, and even breast milk. You also find some that you find in animal milk like cow's milk and other dairy products. You find some types of saturated fat in palm oil and meat, and then also in cocoa. So the ones that I lit up here in blue, butyric acid, lauric acid, stearic acid, these are thought to be not maybe they're neutral or they're just not harmful to our cardiovascular disease in moderate amounts. The ones that I put in orange, myristic acid and palmitic acid, so as you can see, these two types of fats are found typically in animal products, and these tend to be the ones that are correlated with atherosclerosis and cardiovascular disease. So the takeaway from this is that not all saturated fats are terrible. Of course, you want to look at the total amount of saturated fat, but again, there is some distinction amongst the different types of saturated fat. So ask yourself these questions when it comes to saturated fat. Am I eating processed meat or fresh flesh meat? So with processed meats, this is going to be of lesser quality with respect to fats typically compared to flesh meat that especially has been grass-fed versus corn-fed. So you may have seen that some grocery stores and farmers markets are starting to talk about grass-fed meat. What does that mean? That means that the animal was allowed to roam and was fed grass. And grass is high in those good, healthy omega-3 fats. Whereas, remember, with corn is going to be higher in omega-6 fats. So being that we get too much omega-6, we want to have the grass-fed so that we get more of those omega-3 fats that are very healthy and anti-inflammatory. The other question to ask yourself, and this is especially if you're a meat eater, am I balancing the amount of animal foods with plant foods in my everyday eating? So I'm not saying that you must not eat animal foods, but what I am saying is, do you balance the amount of animal foods with the amount of plant foods? That's really important, okay? We know that plant foods are very healthy and help to reduce the incidence of many different chronic diseases, even things like cancer, cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes. So we want to be sure that if we're eating a lot of animal foods, that we balance those animal foods with plant foods. And if we don't eat animal foods, making sure that we balance the types of plant foods that we take in so that we get good healthy proteins and good healthy fats. Okay, so here was a study, and they looked at organic beef versus fast food beef. And what they showed after somebody, a group of people ate the fast food beef versus the organic beef is that there was a change in their cholesterol level. So with the fast food, it basically, you didn't see a lot of change and maybe a little bit of an increase at 6 hours after eating. Whereas with the organic beef meal, believe it or not, there was actually a drop in LDL cholesterol. LDL cholesterol is what we would consider the bad cholesterol. So probably this happened because of the omega-3 fats that were in that organic beef. So saturated fats, yes, you want to reduce those animal fats. They tend to be solid, and just imagine, again, when you have more of these in your body, they may not be as fluid and flowing as you would like in your cell membranes. And we know that these animal fats are linked in high amounts to cardiovascular disease. Now, what are some healthy saturated fats? Because again, I don't want you just to dismiss all saturated fats, because we're learning a lot about saturated fat. Coconut oil is on the comeback. We know a lot more now about coconut oil, and I'm going to speak to that a little bit more. Organic butter is also it's a relatively healthy option compared to other oils that you might select. So the reason for the organic is because, again, having a dairy product that doesn't have the degree of toxins and has a little bit of a better profile compared to a non-organic butter. So I also have on here ghee. What is ghee? Ghee is basically it's used in India, and it's a medicinal form of butter that has been clarified. You can make your own, or you can buy clarified butter at the store. But essentially it means you take sticks of organic butter and you melt them down so that it's just slightly boiling or just starting to get kind of bubbly. And what you're going to see is that there's kind of this foam on top, which you want to take off from that butter. And you want to take out the milk solids, which settle to the bottom, and just keep the liquid portion in the middle. And what I understand is that Harmony Hill is now providing ghee and uses ghee in its meal preparation, which is wonderful. And again, it's those milk solids that tend to be the atherogenic or the cardiovascular disease promoting aspect of butter. Wild game, grass-fed meats, organic poultry, and organic whole eggs are also wonderful options there. So again, making sure that if you do choose to partake in eating these products, that you have a good balance with plant foods. Coconut milk and oil. What we're learning is that coconut has a lot of different functions. Antiviral, antimicrobial, antifungal. It can be applied topically or on the skin. And coconut oil doesn't have those long chain fats. It's got more of the short and the medium chain fats that can quickly be used for energy in the body. These types of saturated fats get absorbed differently than those long animal fats that go through a completely different system in the body and do change your body's physiology differently. So one that I happen to like is Spectrum Naturals, but if you can find an organic coconut oil, I think it's a wonderful addition to the many oils that you might use for cooking. It's heat stable, and also it gives a little bit of a coconut flavor to stir fries and a number of other dishes. So it's not that you want to shift over to coconut oil exclusively. I would say just to introduce it into your eating in small amounts, just to try it out. In fact, Elaine and I were talking before we started about, for those of you that are dairy sensitive, what you may want to try is a coconut milk iced dessert. They don't technically call it ice cream because that has a standard of identity, which is milk-based. But essentially, you can find a coconut-based ice cream-like product, and one that I tend to really like is called Coconut Bliss. Coconut Bliss has just a short ingredient list, and it is organic. It uses a good, healthy sweetener, and is a nice option for people that do want ice cream in the summer but can't do dairy. So again, just watch the amount because it does taste really good. Okay, so benefits of coconut, because we may have been told before to avoid coconut, but if you look at cultures and countries that consume coconut, what you see is actually lower cardiovascular disease risk compared to populations that are not consuming coconut but are having more animal fats. So the long and the short of it here is, probably between 1 to 2 teaspoons per day, nothing excessive, but again, to introduce coconut oil in cooking because it is a great stable fat to use and does have a unique flavor to it. And I'd like to mention that the medium chain triglycerides, that's a fancy term just for saying the medium-sized fats in coconut, have been thought to be really helpful with metabolism. And in fact, when you swap out some of those longer fats with some of the medium fats, what we tend to see is better fat metabolism and better weight management even. And I'll go even further to say that there have been some studies using coconut oil specifically for people with dementia or cognitive decline, because those coconut oil ketones, or those fats, can serve as an alternate fuel source in the brain, especially when the brain doesn't respond to glucose anymore. So lots of different things to look for with coconut. But again, keep it within the context of a good, healthy diet and use a variety of different oils. So now I mentioned the healthy fats. What about the unhealthy fats? And there are lots of unhealthy fats. Margarines tend to have partially hydrogenated oils because they tend to be liquid oils that have turned into solid. So what you get are these trans fats. Vegetable oils, too much of those, corn oil, sunflower, canola oil. Some people have a problem with canola oil because it tends to be genetically modified. And so that tends to be the big issue with canola. But otherwise, it does have omega-3s, and it does have monounsaturated. It's kind of a whole different composition of different fats. Mayonnaise, which can have a lot of saturated fat, tempura, donuts, high-fat cheeses, high-fat cuts of meat, whole-fat milk and cream, butter, ice cream and ice cream products, palm and too much coconut oil, chips fried in oil, regular salad dressing. The regular salad dressing is just loaded with, again, those vegetable oils, as well as sugar. Peanut butter, you might find in your peanut butter some different types of roasted oils that are the vegetable oils, roasted nuts and seeds, shortening, processed and hydrogenated oils, as well as deep fried foods and cake and cookie mixes. So what this means is read the labels as much as you can. And if you do eat animal foods, one way that you can cut back on all of that excessive saturated fat is to trim off the excess fat from the meat, or you can buy leaner cuts, removing the skin from the chicken and the turkey before you cook it, and skim the solid fats from super stews before you reheat them, because what tends to happen under colder temperature is that fat starts to solidify and rises to the top, so you can just skim that right off. Trans fats, I mentioned them before. Trans fats are what are produced in the hydrogenation of liquid oils, and you tend to find more of these things in fried foods, commercially baked goods, processed foods, and margarine. Now, food manufacturers since 2006 have been much more aware of trying to reduce trans fats in their products, because now you have them on the label. So it's no secret anymore. We know exactly how much trans fat is in products. So these are commercially made fats. These are not healthy fats. In fact, they cause very detrimental changes in our blood fats and are connected to cardiovascular disease risk. So here's just a little cartoon of the Fats brothers, right? So on one side you have the trans fats, on the other side you have the saturated fats. So, you know, just seeing the foods that are in front of them with respect to these are the types of foods to watch out for if you're looking to reduce trans fats and saturated fat. All right, so did you know, and I took this picture at a local grocery store, just sitting there with all these processed foods, but at each year, approximately 30,000 premature heart disease deaths can be attributed to the consumption of trans fats. And as I mentioned, trans fats can be found in supermarket foods, cake mixes, chips and snacks, frozen breakfast foods, definitely. Cookies are a huge one to look for. And all these other products that I'm showing in this grocery cart, the muffins, the donuts, these donut holes, you know, basically these processed baked products. And many cereals do contain them as well, but again, since 2006, a lot of food manufacturers are responding to the consumer demand to reduce these. So, trans fatty acids increase the risk of heart attack and stroke, and they make the coronary arteries more rigid, which can lead to the formation of blood clots and ultimately lead to heart attack or stroke. They lower your good cholesterol and they increase your bad cholesterol. So the key point here is keep everything in balance. And when you see low fat on a label, this usually means high sugar. And sugar increases your blood fats as well. So you might think that just fat increases fat in your body, but carbohydrate, especially the simple sugars, also increase your blood fats. So food labels, and there will be a question on this in the end. Let's see if you can remember. So two aspects to look for on the labels. Typically you might see something that says low fat, and low fat means 3 grams of fat or less, and fat-free, which means less than half of a gram of fat per serving. Now, is this valuable information? Well, it's good to know within certain contexts, right? Because obviously, if you were to buy a jar of margarine, or if you're buying some liquid oil, obviously this would not be good, useful information. Typically, you find a lot of these food labels, and Michael Pollan would say this, on a lot of processed food products. And in fact, I almost think of these as buzzwords for what's high in sugar. So keep that in context. And here's an example of a label. And as you can see there, fat is called out up at the top there, saturated fat. You can see the total fat. And what for the average 2,000 calorie diet, it's been recommended that we keep our saturated fat at less than 7% of our calories. So, and I know we don't typically think like that when we're eating. So that's why I think it's just more important to think about the foods that you're ingesting. Well, I feel pretty passionate about food labels, and in fact, when I was at the ripe old age of 9, I remember my mother teaching me how to read food labels, and I would go to the grocery store with her and we'd be reading them together, and so this is in my blood. One of the aspects to think about here is if there is a long laundry list of different ingredients like you see in this picture here, chances are I almost consider this not food anymore. This is a composition of different chemicals that has been positioned as food. So you might recognize some things, but there are a lot of chemical names, and I don't know if you can see it, but there's also this phrase in here, partially hydrogenated soybean and cottonseed oils. So I wrote a book on food additives. Harmony Hill carries this book. It's called An A to Z Guide to Food Additives, Never Eat What You Can't Pronounce. It's a very small, even though it looks large on the screen, it's a very small pocket guide that you can put in your purse to help you make sense of all of these food additives. And if you're in the kind of the guts of the store, as I call it, rather than the perimeter, chances are you'd need a book like this a little bit more to help you decipher these long, lengthy food labels. So how do you look on the label for these bad fats? Well, here's a label of a pastry product, and if we read down this label a little bit, we will start to see the words partially hydrogenated soybean oil. So, partially hydrogenated denotes that there is some degree of trans fat in the product, okay? So keep that in mind. Whenever you see that, whether it's partially hydrogenated coconut oil, partially hydrogenated cottonseed oil, anything partially hydrogenated, think trans fat. Even though the label could say 0 grams of trans fat, for the food manufacturer, you do not have to label anything that's less than 0.5 grams of trans fat per serving. So you could still be getting trans fat, but it might be labeled as 0. So just read the ingredient listing, make sure that you're avoiding these types of fats because indeed you will be getting those trans fats. Okay. Monounsaturated fat. All right, so now we transition away from those saturated and trans fats into the realm of the Mediterranean monounsaturated fats. Many of you have probably heard of how healthful the Mediterranean diet is. And one of the aspects that makes it so healthy is the olive oil that's in it. Olive oil contains these mono, meaning one carbon-carbon double bond in that structure, for those of you that like to know the chemistry. But keep in mind, we make monounsaturated fat in the body. It's not essential. So what are some healthy monounsaturated fats? We would call these omega-9 fats. Things like almond oil, almonds, cashews, almond butter, avocados, peanuts and peanut butter, olives and olive oil, sesame seeds, tahini. Tahini is essentially sesame seed butter. So when you take the sesame seeds and puree them, and you get this wonderful creamy tahini, which is just fantastic with vegetables. Hummus, which is ground up garbanzo or chickpeas. And you can add oil to the hummus a little bit. I've even seen where you can add in your olive oil. Macadamia nuts and pine nuts are all good sources of omega-9 fats. All right, one other point I wanted to mention about olive oil is that when you're buying it, it's really key to look for cold pressed, meaning that there's not heat involved in the processing of the oil, which is good because then you don't get any kind of breakdown of the oil, and look for unfiltered. So in other words, if you hold up that bottle of olive oil in the light, it should be cloudy. And I know that that may seem counterintuitive to you, but what that means is that you actually have the first press of olives. So you're getting a lot of those good medicinal olive compounds in conjunction with the oil. So aim for that cloudy, cold-pressed olive oil in a glass bottle, okay? All right, now what about those essential fats? I already mentioned that these are essential because our bodies don't make them. So they're all that more important for us. There are two different families of those fats. I showed you those early on, the omega-6 family and the omega-3 family. Okay. Now, there are lots of different functions of omega-6 and omega-3 fatty acids. As I mentioned, we find these fats in the cell membrane. So we also find them in the brain. We find them in the heart. We find them in the skin. And basically, every cell in the body has the ability to have these essential fatty acids. And as I mentioned to you, the standard American diet, otherwise known as SAD, is typically high in these omega-6 fats and low in omega-3. So take a look at this graph here. So prehistoric times, if we go way back, essentially there was about a 1-to-1, equal amounts of omega-6 and omega-3. 1900, the verge of the agricultural revolution, what we start to see is a little bit more in the way of omega-6. 2000, look at this, 25-to-1. Is it any wonder that we have all of this inflammation, all of these chronic diseases cropping up? The balance of fats in our diet and what we're taking in is really, we really need to shift it back in order to again, bring ourselves into a state of health. So when we're eating too many omega-6 fats, we can get a lot of inflammation in the body. Okay, we do need omega-6. I don't want to give you the wrong message here, but it's about the ratio. It's about the proportion of omega-6 to omega-3. So we eat a lot of these omega-6, and typically we find a lot of omega-6 in the seed oils like corn oil, but also we can find one of these fats, arachidonic acid, in meat. And what we see is that when we take in this, we essentially run this through our body, and we can get inflammation. Whereas the omega-3 fats can be very cooling, just like fish, the source that they come from. We also find these omega-3 fats in certain vegetables, and I'll show you those. Okay, so this is a little bit of complicated arrows here, but let me just take you through this very simply. It's really easy. Let's stay on the left side. We've got, here's the whole umbrella of essential fats, omega-6, omega-3. On the left, focusing on the yellow, what we see is that there are certain types of fats, like linoleic acid, that predominate in oils like corn, safflower, sunflower, and sesame. Now, This linoleic acid converts in your body to another fat called GLA. GLA is a good, healthy fat. We need it for the skin. But too much, and what we can get is more of what you see in red here, which is called arachidonic acid. I put it in red because this is the fat that leads to inflammation. This is the fat that we typically find in a lot of animal products. So you see that omega-6 can be helpful. We need certain amounts, but we don't want to go over the top into too much because then we drive the pathway right into inflammation. On the other side, I put this in cooling blue because many of these omega-3s will lead to reducing the heat or inflammation in the body. So up at the top, we see the big, the headline fatty acid here, alpha-linolenic acid. This converts in your body to EPA, which is the same fat that you find in fish oil, and DHA, same fatty acid you find in fish oil. These types of fats convert to substances that reduce inflammation. Okay? So I am going to move through that biochemistry. I think you get a good sense. But essentially, you want to make sure that those short chain fats that start at the top, like the linoleic acid and the alpha-linolenic acid, that they can convert into the healthful long-chain fats, especially on the blue side where we have the omega-3s. If our cholesterol is too high, we have too much dietary saturated fat, too much trans fat, too much stress, alcohol. If we have diabetes, we have too much sugar, or we don't have enough vitamins B6, B3, C, magnesium, and zinc, what can happen is we don't get proper conversion of those short chain fats up at the top into the longer chain fats. So in other words, that alpha-linolenic, I'm just going to go back here. On the right, you see the blue, alpha-linolenic acid. We need our bodies to be working right in order to give us EPA and DHA. Many times we don't get good conversion because of lack of certain vitamins and minerals and stress and so forth. Okay, so what happens if you have a fatty acid imbalance? You're probably thinking to yourself, well, gosh, Deanna, how do I know if I have too much omega-6 and not enough omega-3? Well, I would definitely advise that you see a physician that can assess the levels of these fats in your blood, and there is a way to do that. You can also look at your symptoms. Do you have dry skin? Is your skin flaky? Do you have dandruff? Do you have any kind of behavioral issues, irritability, attention deficit? A lot of skin issues are really related to fatty acid issues, a lot of learning problems, immune issues. Poor wound healing and increased infections could be connected to an imbalance of the omega-6 and the omega-3s. Look at your hair, look at your nails. Do you have that chicken skin on the back of your arms, the back of your upper arms? There's a fancy term for that called follicular hyperkeratosis. It could be because of fatty acids. It could also be because of vitamin A deficiency or not digesting protein. But in general, take a look at your skin. When we have these longer-term essential fatty acid imbalances, what we see are the itises, the inflammation, arthritis, whether it's rheumatoid arthritis, osteoarthritis, asthma, atherosclerosis, autoimmune disease, cardiovascular disease, and even cancer. So these types of chronic conditions can be associated with imbalances in those omega-6 and omega-3 fats. So as you can see here, the dermatitis, the skin, the itching, the inflammation, also any kind of mood abnormalities. So how could you get an imbalance? Well, one way is if you malabsorb fat, okay, so some people, in fact, I did a lot of research on this, looking at people with cystic fibrosis or people with issues with bile. We need bile, which comes from the liver, in order to absorb fat. And when we have problems with bile, we may be malabsorbing some fat. If you're on a very low-fat diet, this is where we start to see essential fatty acid imbalance. If you are a vegetarian and not getting good healthy oils, you could also see an essential fatty acid imbalance. And if you eat lots of processed foods that are rich in those trans fats, chances are you could have an imbalance as well. The whole body, there is not one system I can think of that does not benefit from essential fats and having that good, healthy ratio. The biggest thing, I think, as it relates to chronic disease is really to get your immune system in balance so that you don't have all this inflammation. So, what are some healthy omega-6 fats? Whole organic eggs, grass-fed meats, Brazil nuts, pecans, hazelnuts, filberts, hemp seeds. In fact, they even have hemp milk now. Evening primrose oil you can usually find as a dietary supplement. Black currant oil and borage oil, also dietary supplements. Hemp oil, grapeseed oil, sunflower seeds, and pumpkin seeds are all good sources of healthy omega-6 fats. Omega-3 fats are coming from, as I've been talking about, fish, looking at salmon and finfish. Some shellfish also contain appreciable amounts of omega-3s. Flax seeds, in order for you to access the fat in the flax seeds, you've got to grind them up. So it really has to be flaxseed meal, okay? So you can do that in a little coffee grinder, or you can buy them already prepared as flaxseed meal in the store. Flaxseed oil, algae. Now you're thinking, I don't ever eat algae. Well, there are dietary supplements that are algal-based for vegetarians who need to get those omega-3, the long-chain omega-3s like EPA and DHA, okay? Because you can't get those really in good amounts from sources other than fish. Greens powder, you know, there are a number of different kind of living green type powders that you can get. Chia seeds and hemp oil can also, and you wouldn't cook with hemp oil, by the way. That's an oil you would make into a salad dressing. Okay, so here are some sources of omega-3 fats, and you're going to have this in your handout as well, so no worries about scribbling down all these notes. Grapeseed oil, which is a great oil for cooking, has a little bit of omega-3, not very much. Mustard greens and greens also has some small amount. Spinach, but as you can see here as we go up the line, white tuna, salmon, canola oil, walnuts, ground flaxseed oil all contain pretty good amounts of omega-3s. But the amount of the omega-3s in the flaxseed and in the nuts, the type of fat there is a little bit different than in the fish because you're getting the ALA, the shorter omega-3, and not necessarily those longer chain EPA and DHA, which you need for the brain. So some food sources of the EPA and DHA. If you can get a serving of salmon, you get nice amounts of EPA and DHA. In fact, you get that the American Heart Association recommends for cardiovascular maintenance about 1 gram of EPA and DHA, or 1 gram of these fish oils per day. So with salmon, what you see here is that in a 2-ounce serving, essentially you can get that amount of EPA and DHA. Now, word of caution around eating so much fish, right? Because fish, I mentioned early on, has levels of mercury. You want to avoid and reduce some of the specific types of fish that tend to be higher in mercury. So not eating shark, and of course that's not very common, but swordfish can be relatively common, as well as mackerel is relatively common, golden snapper. So trying to reduce those as much as possible, and if not, eliminate them. Eating up to 12 ounces or 2 average meals per week of a variety of fish lower in mercury. And those fish sources are canned light tuna, shrimp, salmon, catfish, and pollock. So it's a white fish. And limiting the consumption of albacore tuna and tuna steak to 6 ounces per week. So the canned light tuna is a better choice than the albacore tuna. You get more mercury in the albacore. And if you're eating local catches, make sure that you check with your local advisories. So there are lots of recommendations, especially for pregnant women that are concerned about getting too much mercury. And If you look, it's really about body weight, right? So if you are heavier and bigger, you can take on more of the tuna compared to somebody that's smaller. So keep that in mind for children, teens, and people that are lighter in stature. So as you can see here, this is a wonderful website, by the way. If you go to Natural Resources Defense Council, and the website is nrdc.org, you'll get lots of good information about what types of fish sources to be eating. So here it is, nrdc.org/mercury, and you will have, they give you a nice, in fact, Harmony Hill has this, and they give it out to their cancer retreat participants, and it shows them the least mercury, moderate mercury, high mercury, and highest, and it will tell you roughly how many times per month you can consume those types of fish. Okay, in terms of the vegetable sources, I've already mentioned a number of different vegetable sources of these omega-3s. The flaxseed oil is by far and away the best source you can get. Point about it, though, is don't cook with flaxseed oil. That is more of a dressing type of oil. And what you can do is you can very easily make your own salad dressing with 2 parts of flaxseed oil, 4 parts of extra virgin olive oil, the unfiltered type, cold pressed, and either red wine or balsamic vinegar. And if you want, you can add in a small amount of toasted sesame oil for flavor. As you can tell, I don't I don't have very specific recipes. It's just kind of a feel, and you can see when things start to mix. So the American Heart Association recommends eating fish, especially fatty fish, at least 2 times or 2 servings a week. And a serving is, you know, it's roughly about the size of the palm of your hand, okay? A little bit longer if it's thinner. So 3.5 ounces cooked, or about 3/4 cup of flaked fish. Fatty fish like salmon, mackerel, herring, lake trout, sardines, and albacore tuna are high in omega-3s. And of course, if we can get this through food, that's the best. If you can't get this through food and you don't eat fish for some reason, you may want to talk with your physician about dietary supplementation with omega-3s. So if you have high triglycerides and you want to bring those down, larger doses of these omega-3s can help. And the reason why I say to work with your physician is because if you have a lot of omega-3 fats, because they create so much flow, they can cause excessive bleeding. So if you have, what that means is, like if you're going in for surgery, you definitely would want to pull back on the amount of dietary supplement omega-3s that you're taking. All right, so what do you look for in a fish oil supplements? Make sure it's pure, make sure it's got some antioxidants to preserve the oils, and you don't want fishy smell or taste. That means that it's already been broken down. So as you can see, I'm already alluding to the fact that fats are really important for heart health. They help to improve cardiovascular health. They help to prevent these unhealthy heart rhythms that can lead to sudden cardiac death. They can help decrease the risk of clots. They can help decrease serum triglycerides. So these are unhealthy blood fats. They can help slow the growth of plaque, help improve blood vessel function, help lower blood pressure, and as we've been talking about all tonight, help decrease inflammation. So is it better to have more fish? Well, what we see here in this study by Dr. Willett in JAMA, which is a big medical journal, is that women who rarely ate fish, so less than 1 time per month, had essentially that their risk for coronary heart disease was 21%, 29%, 31%, and 34% lower for fish consumption 1 to 3 times per month, once per week, 2 to 4 times per week, and greater than 5 times per week, respectively. So it's better to have a little bit of fish, and also good to keep in mind not to be excessive in fish that contains high amounts of mercury. I talked about the brain, and this is a close-up of 2 neurons in the brain, and you can see that, you know, lots of different pathways here, but essentially the more we can make things flow back and forth, the healthier our brain will be. And when it comes to behavior, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, aggression, anxiety, autism, the development of the brain, depression, schizophrenia, and stress can all be connected to healthy fats in the brain. Depression. Depression is a risk factor for cardiovascular disease. What we see is restoring healthy levels of these fats in our body can help to reduce depression. Even aggression, believe it or not, general aggression in violent offenders has, what they've seen in literature is some acid abnormalities. So getting your brain in check, helping to promote healthier brain aging, helping to get more of these omega-3s in whatever way you can, seems like a really good thing to do. Okay, other recommendations, fat consumption, I talked about the absolute quantity, 20 to 30% of calories is usually what the guideline is. Cook with olive oil or small amounts of medium-chain natural oils like coconut oil. And as I mentioned, if you can, purchase good quality oils, cold-pressed, tinted glassed, extra virgin, unfiltered, that cloudy olive oil. And I would say stay away from fat substitutes. There are lots of them out there. They can give you diarrhea, can lead to the malabsorption of fat-soluble vitamins. So I'm not a big advocate of these different types of fat-soluble substitutes that you tend to find in processed foods. I am a big advocate, however, of phytosterols. And phytosterols are a type of fat, or at least a fat-like compound found in vegetables that can help us to block cholesterol absorption in our intestine. So let's just summarize here. What do you watch for? Focus on omega-3 fats, healthy polyunsaturated fats, the healthy monounsaturated fats like olive oil and avocados, and reduce or avoid those trans fats, animal-derived saturated fats, and too many of those omega-6 fats. Okay, we're going to close with the fat test. Let's see how much you can remember. Okay, so question 1, why do we need fat in our diet? So we have a number of different selections here. Is it to process vitamins A, D, E, and K, to give us energy, for healthy skin and hair, all of the above? Well, if you answered all of the above, you would be right. Very good. Number 2, too much fat can lead to, number 1, ketosis and fatigue. Number 2, osteoporosis and insomnia. Number 3, weight gain and heart disease. Or number 4, bad breath and constipation. If you guess number 3, that's the one that really is the main issue with too much fat. We talked about heart disease, and too much of anything can lead to weight gain. All right, so what percentage of total calories should come from fat? I mentioned that at the very end there. So 30% or less, 20% or less, 40% or less. The correct answer is number 1, 30% or less is thought to be healthy. How many calories are there in a gram of fat? Number 1, are there 4 calories? Number 2, are there 9 calories? Number 3, are there 7 calories? And this I mentioned early on. 9 calories in a gram of fat. All right, and how much saturated fat should we consume according to food authorities? Is it less than 20% of our total calories, less than 15%, or less than 7%? What do you think? Well, it's the lowest one, less than 7%. All right, question 6, which of these contains the least amount of saturated fat? We've got whole milk, beef, cheese, and canola oil. It would be canola oil. The reason why is because that's a liquid fat coming from a vegetable source. And question 7, I've got just a couple more of these. So which of these is high in saturated fat? I've got butter, corn oil, pasta noodles, and eggs. Well, butter is high in saturated fat. It's essentially all saturated fat. Okay. Question 8, what would be one good way to cut saturated fat in cooking? Would you use butter instead of lard? Would you use canola oil instead of butter? Use sour cream instead of whipping cream? Or use soft cheese instead of hard cheese? Well, the correct answer here is to use the oil instead of the butter. And what does low fat mean on food labels? If you see the low fat, what's the key? Does it mean 3 grams of fat or less per serve, 5 grams of fat or less, 7 grams, or 10 grams? Well, if you recall accurately, it would be 3. I mentioned that very briefly when we talked about our labeling. And the final question, what does fat-free mean on food labels? 0 grams of fat, less than 1 gram of fat, less than half a gram of fat, or less than 2 grams of fat. Fat-free means less than 0.5 grams of fat on the label. So with that, I'd like to just share the summary. Hopefully what you're taking away tonight is that it's important to eat fats. Some fats must be eaten since our bodies do not make them. They're essential. Try to limit as best you can animal-derived saturated fat and avoid at all costs trans fat. Aim for healthy ratios of omega-6 and omega-3 fats. And use fish oil supplements under the supervision of a physician to ensure adequate intake. So I'd like to just show you that, again, I have a number of books that Harmony Hill carries. My website is foodandspirit.com. I also have a Facebook page, Food and Spirit with Deanna Minich. And I'd like to thank you. I realize that this is a lot of information. We got off to a little bit of a late start, and I went a little bit over. But hopefully you find this information good. You will have a handout, so no worries if you feel a little bit of overwhelm. But you will definitely be able to make sense of a lot of this information when you see that information. And I welcome, if you have any questions, I will definitely be able to take them at this time.
Deanna, can you hear me?
I can.
Oh, great. I was going to ask you a question. Early in the presentation, you said that we need fats in order to absorb vitamins, especially vitamin D. And normally in the morning, I eat oatmeal for breakfast, and I don't think there's any fat in oatmeal, but I take my vitamins then. What do you recommend in terms of a fat to make sure the vitamins get absorbed?
Sure. So what you can do with your oatmeal is maybe add in a little bit of the coconut oil, or even a little bit of butter is okay, right? Because we talked about just small, modest amounts of saturated fat. You can also, maybe you use some type of milk product, whether a rice milk, an almond milk, a coconut milk that you put on your oatmeal. So that will also help with the absorption of the vitamin D.
If I take a fish oil supplement with vitamins, would that do it?
That could help. In that case, the fish oil is going to be in a soft gel typically, and the vitamin D will also be in a soft gel. So you hope that both of them disintegrate at the same time. What you may want to try is maybe a liquid fish oil that you take in a spoon versus the one in the soft gel, just to ensure that you do have that fat ready and available as a vehicle for that vitamin D.
Great, great. Will do. Well, thank you again this evening for a wonderful presentation. There was so much information here. I'm glad we've got it recorded so that we can review it, and that you'll have a handout online for us, because it was really packed with information and extremely informative. So we really appreciate you joining us and look forward to talking to you again next Sunday at 6.
Right, and we'll be talking about how to keep balanced weight during that time. So for those of you that are interested in getting into a healthy body composition, maybe losing weight, what are the eating strategies to follow?
Great. Thanks, Deanna.